Miguel Street, Chapter 3. George and the Pink House. I was much more afraid of George than I was of Bigfoot, although Bigfoot was the biggest and strongest man in the street. George was short and fat. He had grey mustache and a big belly. He looked harmless enough, but he was always muttering to himself and cursing, and I never tried to become friendly with him. He was like a donkey he had tied in the front of his yard, grey and old and silent, except when it brayed loudly. You felt that George was never really in touch with what was going on around him all the time, and I found it strange that no one should have said that George was mad, while everybody said that Man, whom I liked, was mad. George's house also made me feel afraid. It was broken down, wooden building, painted pink on the outside, and the galvanized iron roof was brown from rust. One door, the one to the right, was always left open. The inside walls had never been painted and were grey and black with age. There was a dirty bed in one corner, and in another there was a table and a stool. That was all. No curtains, no pictures on the wall. And even Bogart had a picture of Lauren Bacall in his room. I found it hard to believe that George had a wife and a son and a daughter. Like Popo, George was happy to let his wife do all the work in the house and the yard. They kept cows, and again I hated George for that, because the water from his pens made the gutters stink, and when we were playing cricket on the pavement, the ball often got wet in the gutter. Boye and Errol used to wet the ball deliberately in the stinking gutter. They wanted to make it shoot. George's wife was never a proper person. I always thought of her just as George's wife, and that was all. And I always thought too that George's wife was nearly always in the cow pen. And while George sat on the front concrete step outside the open door of his house, his wife was busy. George never became one of the gang in Miguel Street. He didn't seem to mind. He had his wife and his daughter and his son. He beat them all. And when the boy Elias grew too big, George beat his daughter and his wife more than ever. The blows didn't appear to do the mother any good. She just grew thinner and thinner, but the daughter Dolly thrived on it. She grew fatter and giggled more and more every year. Elias, the son, grew more and more stern, but he never spoke a hard word to his father. Had said, "That boy Elias have too much good mind." One day, Bogart of all people said, I'm mad to break old George tail up, you hear?" And the few times when Elias joined the crowd, Hat would say, "Boy, I'm too sorry for you. Why you don't fix the old man up good?" Elias would say, "It's all God's work." Elias was only 14 or so at the time, but that was the sort of boy he was. He was serious and he had big ambitions. I began to be terrified of George, particularly when he bought two great all-station dogs and tied them to pickets at the foot of the concrete steps. Every morning and afternoon when I passed his house, he would say to the dogs, "Shook him!" And the dogs would bound and leap and bark, and I could see their ropes stretched tight, and I always felt the ropes would break at the next leap. Now, when Hat had an all-station, he made it like me, and Hat had said to me then, "Never afraid, dog, go brave, don't run." And so I used to walk slowly past George's house, lengthening out my torture. I don't know whether George disliked me personally, or whether he simply had no use for people in general. I never discussed it with the other boys in the street, because I was too ashamed to say I was afraid of barking dogs. Presently, though, I grew used to the dogs, and even George's laughter when I passed the house didn't worry me very much. One day, George was on the pavement as I was passing, and I heard him mumbling. I heard him mumble again that afternoon and again the following day. He was saying, "Horse face." Sometimes he said, "Like it only have horse face people living in this place." Sometimes he said, "Short ass." And, "But why it have people so short ass in the world?" I pretended not to hear, of course, but after a week or so I was almost in tears whenever George mumbled these things. One evening, when we had stopped playing cricket on the pavement because Boye had hit the ball into Miss Hilton's yard, and that was a lost ball. It counted 6 and out. That evening I asked Elias, "But what your father have with me, so? Why does he keep on calling me names?" Hat laughed, and Elias looked a little solemn. Hat said, "What sort of names?" I said, "The fat old man does call me horse face." I couldn't bring myself to say the other name. Hat began laughing. Elias said, "Boy, my father is a funny man, but you must forgive him. What he said don't matter. He old. He have life hard. He not educated like we here. He have a soul just like any of we too besides." And he was so serious that Hat didn't laugh, and whenever I walked past George's house, I kept on saying to myself, "I must forgive him. He ain't know what he doing." And then Elias's mother died, and had the shabbiest and the saddest and the loneliest funeral Miguel Street had ever seen. That empty front room became sadder and more frightening for me. The strange thing was that I felt a little sorry for George. The Miguel Street men held a post-mortem outside Hat's house. Hat said, "He did beat she too bad." Bogart nodded and drew a circle on the pavement with his right index finger. Edward said, "I think he killed she, you know." "Boy, tell me that the evening before she did he hear George giving the woman licks like fire." Hat said, "What you think they have doctors and magistrates in this place for? For fun?" "But I telling you," Edward said, "it really true. Boy, he wouldn't lie about a thing like that. The woman dead from blows. I telling you, London can take it, but not George's wife." Not one of the men said a word for George. Boy said something I didn't expect him to say. He said, "The person I really feel sorry for is Dolly. You suppose he go and beat she still?" Hat said wisely, "Let me wait and see." Elias dropped out of our circle. George was very sad for the first few days after the funeral. He drank a lot of rum and went about crying in the streets, beating his chest and asking everybody to forgive him and take pity on him, a poor widower. He kept up the drinking into the following weeks, and he was still running up and down the street, making everyone feel foolish when he asked for forgiveness. "My son Elias," George used to say, "my son Elias, forgive me." And he was educated boy. When he came to Hat, Hat said, "What happening to your cows? You milking them? You feeding them? You want to kill your cows now too?" George sold all his cows to Hat. "God will say it's robbery," Hat laughed. "I say it's bargain." Edward said, "It good for George. He beginning to pay for his sins." "Well, I look at it this way," Hat said. "I give him enough money to remain drunk for 2 whole months." George was away from Miguel Street for a week. During that time, we saw more of Dolly. She swept out the front room and begged flowers of the neighbors and put them in the room. She giggled more than ever. Someone in the street, not me, poisoned the 2 oil stations. We hoped that George had gone away for good. He did come back, however, still drunk, but no longer crying or helpless, and he had a woman with him. She was a very Indian woman, a little old, but she looked strong enough to handle George. She looked like a drinker herself, Hat said. This woman took control of George's house, and once more Dolly retreated into the back, where the empty cow pens were. We heard stories of beatings, and everybody said he was sorry for Dolly and the new woman. My heart went out to the woman and Dolly. I couldn't understand how anybody in this world would want to live with George, and I wasn't surprised when one day, about 2 weeks later, Popo told me, "George new wife leave him, you ain't here?" Hat said, "I wonder what he going to do when the money I give him finish." We soon saw. The Pink House almost overnight became a full and noisy place. There were many women about, talking loudly and not paying too much attention to the way they dressed. And whenever I passed the Pink House, these women shouted abusive remarks at me, and some of them did things with their mouths, inviting me to come to Mama. And there were not only these new women. Many American soldiers drove up in jeeps, and Miguel Street became full of laughter and shrieks. Hat said, "That man George giving the street a bad name, you know." It was as though Miguel Street belonged to these new people. Hat and the rest of the boys were no longer assured of privacy when they sat down to talk things over on the pavement. But Bogart became friendly with the new people and spent 2 or 3 evenings a week with them. He pretended he was disgusted at what he saw, but I didn't believe him because he was always going back. "What happening to Dolly?" Hat asked him one day. "She there," Bogart said, meaning that she was all right. "I know she there," Hat said, "but how she there?" "Well, she cleaning and cooking." "For everybody?" "Everybody." Elias had a room of his own which he never left whenever he came home. He ate his meals outside. He was trying to study for some important exam. He had lost interest in his family, Bogart said, or rather implied. George was still drinking a lot, but he was prospering. He was wearing a suit now and a tie. Hat said, "He must be making a lot of money if he have to bribe all the policemen and them." What I couldn't understand at all, though, was the way these new women behaved to George. They all appeared to like him as well as respect him. And George wasn't attempting to be nice in return either. He remained himself. One day he said to everyone, "Dolly ain't have no mama now. I have to be father and mother to the child. And I say it's high time Dolly get married." His choice fell on a man called Razor. It was hard to think of a more suitable name for this man. He was small, he was thin, he had a neat, sharp moustache above neat, tiny lips. The creases on his trousers were always sharp and clean and straight, and he was supposed to carry a knife. Hat didn't like Dolly marrying Razor. "He too sharp for we," he said. "He's the sort of man who wouldn't think anything about forgetting a knife in your back, you know." But Dolly giggled. Razor and Dolly were married at church, and they came back to a reception in the Pink House. The women were all dressed up, and there were lots of American soldiers and sailors drinking and laughing and congratulating George. The women and the Americans made Dolly and Razor kiss, and they cheered. Dolly giggled. Hat said, "She ain't giggling, you know, she crying really." Elias wasn't at home that day. The women and the Americans sang Sweet 16 and As Time Goes By. Then they made Dolly and Razor kiss again. Someone shouted, "Speech!" and everybody laughed and shouted, "Speech! Speech!" Razor left Dolly standing by herself, giggling. "Speech! Speech!" the wedding guests called. Dolly only giggled more. Then George spoke out. "Dolly, you married, it true, but don't think you're too big for me to put you across my lap and cut your tail." He said it in a jocular manner, and the guests laughed. Then Dolly stopped giggling and looked stupidly at the people. For a moment so brief you could scarcely measure it, there was absolute silence. Then an American sailor waved his hands drunkenly and shouted, "You could put this girl to better work, George." And everybody laughed. Dolly picked up a handful of gravel from the yard and was making as if to throw it at the sailor, but she stopped suddenly and burst into tears. There was much laughing and cheering and shouting. I never knew what happened to Dolly. Edward said one day that she was living in the Sangre Grande. Hat said he saw her selling in the George Street market, but she had left the street, left it for good. As the months went by, the women began to disappear, and the numbers of jeeps that stopped outside George's house grew smaller. "You got to be organized," Hat said. Bogart nodded. Hat added, "And they have lots of nice places all over the place in Port of Spain these days. The trouble with George is that he's too stupid for a big man." Hat was a prophet. Within 6 months, George was living alone in his pink house. I used to see him then, sitting on the steps, but he never looked at me anymore. He looked old and weary and very sad. He died soon afterwards. Hat and the boys got some money together, and we buried him at Lapper House Cemetery. Elias turned up for the funeral. End of chapter 3.